Blake Valentino's thumb hovered over the decline button on his phone when he saw the caller ID, but something stopped him perhaps. It was his father's recent lecture about responsibility, or the fact that he'd been dodging this particular call for 3 days. Whatever the reason, the 28-year-old tech millionaire finally answered. "Blake, my boy," Richard Thompson's booming voice came through. "I was beginning to think you'd vanished off the face of the earth. Just busy, Richard." Blake's eyes wandered around his minimalist penthouse, noting the untouched coffee machine and the pile of unopened mail. "What's so urgent?" "The charity gala, of course, the one your mother chaired for 15 years before she passed. The one you promised to maintain involvement with." Blake closed his eyes, guilt washing over him. His mother had died 2 years ago and he'd made that promise at her funeral, a promise he'd conveniently been ignoring. "I'm still involved. The Valentino Foundation donated generously last quarter," Richard sighed. "Money isn't everything, Blake. The annual spring charity ball includes that ballroom dance competition. Your mother and father won it 3 years running, remember?" "I remember," Blake said quietly. "The committee was expecting, really, that you would participate. It's in 6 weeks. The publicity would boost donations tremendously." Blake ran a hand through his dark hair. "Richard, I haven't danced since college and I don't have a partner. Find one, take lessons, it's for charity, Blake, for your mother's legacy." The guilt card. "It worked every time, fine. I'll figure something out." Blake ended the call and tossed his phone onto the couch. He needed a dance partner who knew what they were doing and had enough free time to practice with him for the next 6 weeks, and who wouldn't sell the story to the tabloids. And who wouldn't expect anything from him afterward. Blake opened his laptop and searched best ballroom dance instructors in the city. That's when he found Elevate Dance Studio and a certain instructor named Riley Evans. Riley glanced at her watch and suppressed a yawn. Teaching 3 back-to-back private lessons had drained her, but rent was due next week, and she needed all the hours she could get. Running her own dance studio was rewarding but financially precarious. "Miss Evans." The studio receptionist poked her head into the practice room. "There's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but..." She lowered her voice. "He says he'll pay double your rate for an immediate consultation." Riley raised an eyebrow. "I have 15 minutes before my next student. Send him in." She expected some desperate father of the bride who had postponed dance lessons until the last minute. Instead, a tall, broad-shouldered man with intense blue eyes and a tailored charcoal suit stepped into her studio. "Riley Evans." His voice was deep, confident. "Yes, and you are?" "Blake Valentino." He extended his hand. Riley shook it, trying not to show her recognition. Everyone in the city knew Blake Valentino, the tech wonderkind who'd sold his startup for millions at 24 and had since doubled his fortune. His face occasionally graced business magazines and local society pages. "How can I help you, Mr. Valentino?" "I need a dance partner for a charity competition. 6 weeks from now, it's ballroom waltz, foxtrot, that sort of thing." Riley crossed her arms. "And you came to me because..." "Your website mentions your competitive background, 5 regional championships in ballroom dance." "That was years ago. I teach now. I'm willing to pay you generously to be my partner and coach." He named a figure that made Riley blink. "That's substantial," she admitted, mentally calculating how that money could help her struggling studio. "But I typically don't partner with students for competitions." "This isn't about winning," he said, though something in his expression suggested otherwise. "It's for my mother's charity." The annual spring charity ball. Riley recognized the event. It was prestigious and always featured in the society pages. "Do you have any dance experience at all?" "I took lessons in college. I'm not starting from zero." Riley studied him. He had the height and physique for ballroom dance, and there was something intriguing about his intensity. Plus, that fee would cover 3 months of studio rent, 3 private sessions per week starting tomorrow, she said. "Non-negotiable if you want to be competition ready. And I'll need to see what you remember before I commit fully." "Fine. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., Riley nodded, trying not to think about how early that would be. "Wear comfortable clothes and leather-soled shoes. Leave the suit at home." See you tomorrow, Miss Evans." He turned to leave, then paused. "And thank you." As Blake's expensive cologne lingered in the studio, Riley wondered what she'd gotten herself into. Blake arrived at Elevate Dance Studio at 6:55 a.m., dressed in black track pants and a fitted gray t-shirt. He'd spent years cultivating a certain image, confident, untouchable, slightly intimidating, but as he pushed open the glass door, he felt strangely vulnerable. Riley was already there, stretching on the wooden floor. She wore simple black dance pants and a blue top, her auburn hair pulled into a neat ponytail. She looked up as he entered. "Good morning. You're early." "Always am," he replied. It was true, being punctual was one of the few habits his father had successfully instilled in him. Riley stood and approached him, professional but warm. "Let's see what we're working with. Show me your frame." Blake hesitated, then stepped forward and positioned his arms as he remembered. Riley circled him, making small adjustments to his posture. "Shoulders down," she said, lightly pressing on them. "Chest up, but not stiff." Her touch was clinical, but Blake found himself unusually aware of it. When was the last time someone had touched him without wanting something? "Let's try a basic waltz step," Riley suggested. "I'll lead first so you can remember the feeling, then we'll switch." She stepped into his frame, one hand on his shoulder, the other clasping his hand. Blake instinctively placed his hand on her back. They were nearly the same height, with Riley in her low dance heels. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, she counted, guiding him through the box step. Blake followed, mechanical at first, then with growing confidence as muscle memory returned. "Not bad," Riley said, stepping back. "Your frame is decent and you remember the basic steps. Now you lead." When they switched positions, Blake felt the weight of leading, not just physically guiding their movement, but being responsible for what came next. His steps were more hesitant now. "You're thinking too much," Riley observed. "Ballroom dance is paradoxical. It requires both control and surrender." "You've got the control part down," Blake's mouth twitched. "Surrender isn't really in my repertoire." "Then we'll have to put it there." She stopped and looked him in the eye. "This partnership only works with trust. I need to trust that you'll lead clearly, and you need to trust that I'll follow your lead even if you make a mistake." For the next hour, they worked on basic waltz patterns. Blake was a quick study, but Riley didn't offer praise easily. She had him repeat movements until they flowed naturally, correcting his technique with a firm but patient touch. By the end of the session, Blake was sweating and more physically tired than he'd expected. But there was also satisfaction in mastering something new, or rather, remembering something he'd once enjoyed. "Same time Wednesday?" he asked, gathering his things. Riley nodded. "I've cleared my schedule for Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. We'll focus on waltz this week, then move to foxtrot next week." "What about the competition pieces specifically?" "One step at a time, Mr. Valentino. We need to rebuild your foundation before we choreograph the competition routines." "Blake," he corrected. "If we're going to be spending this much time together, you should call me Blake." Something in her expression softened. "Blake, then, but don't expect me to go easy on you just because we're on a first-name basis. I'd be disappointed if you did." As Blake left the studio, he realized he felt more energized than he had in months. He attributed it to the physical exercise and the mental challenge of learning something new. It had nothing to do with the auburn-haired dance instructor, whose touch seemed to linger long after he'd left the studio. By their fourth lesson, Riley was impressed with Blake's progress. He moved with increasing confidence, his natural athleticism making up for his years away from dance. But there was something still holding him back. "You're dancing like it's a business negotiation," she said, stopping their music. Technically correct, but emotionally disconnected. Blake stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "I'm following all your instructions. Dancing isn't just about steps and timing, it's about feeling." Riley hesitated, then asked, "Why is this competition so important to you?" "And don't give me the charity line again." Blake's jaw tightened. For a moment, Riley thought he might walk out. "My mother," he finally said. "She founded the charity that hosts this ball. She and my father won the dance competition 3 years in a row before I was born." After she died 2 years ago, I promised to stay involved, but I've been distant. Riley nodded, understanding dawning. And now you're trying to honor her memory. Something like that. Blake looked away. Can we get back to the dancing? Actually, this helps. Riley walked over to the sound system. Let's try something different. What kind of music did your mother like? Blake looked surprised by the question. Classical, mostly. Chopin was her favorite. Riley scrolled through her playlist and found a Chopin nocturne. The haunting piano notes filled the studio. Dance with me, she said softly. Don't count steps. Don't think about technique. Just dance with the memory of her. Blake's hesitation was visible, but he stepped forward and took Riley in his frame. As they began to move, Riley felt a subtle change in his posture, less rigid, more present. That's it, she encouraged. Let the music move through you. They waltzed across the studio, their movements becoming more fluid with each turn. When the music swelled, Blake spontaneously led Riley into a natural spin turn they hadn't practiced yet, executing it with surprising grace. Riley followed his lead perfectly, their bodies in sync. When the music ended, they remained in position for a moment longer than necessary, both slightly breathless. That, Riley said, stepping back, is what I've been trying to get from you. Something had shifted between them. The professional distance they'd maintained began to blur as their lessons continued. Riley found herself looking forward to their sessions more than she cared to admit. Blake, too, discovered that dance studio became a sanctuary from the pressures of his business life. For 3 hours each week, he wasn't focused on acquisitions or board meetings, just on movement, music, and the growing connection with his dance partner. 2 weeks before the competition, they stayed late to finalize their waltz routine. Riley had booked the studio until 9 p.m., knowing they needed uninterrupted time. From the beginning, she said, starting the music, a romantic orchestral piece they'd selected together, they moved through the choreography they'd been perfecting for weeks. Their opening was elegant, transitioning into more complex patterns as the music built. Blake led with confidence now, his frame strong but not overpowering. When they reached the dramatic middle section, Blake lifted Riley in a carefully practiced move that had taken days to master. As he set her down, his hand lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary. The routine ended with a series of rapid turns followed by a final pose, Blake dipping Riley low, their faces inches apart. They held the position, both breathing heavily. That was. Riley began. Perfect, Blake finished, slowly bringing her upright but not stepping away. The studio was quiet except for the sound of their breathing. Blake tucked a loose strand of hair behind Riley's ear, his fingers grazing her cheek. We should run it again, Riley said abruptly, stepping back. Your left turn needs to be sharper in the second sequence. Blake nodded, the moment broken. Right. They ran the routine twice more, focusing on technical details and avoiding each other's eyes. When they finally finished for the night, an awkward tension hung between them. Do you want to grab a late dinner? Blake asked as they gathered their things. We should probably discuss costume coordination for the competition. Riley hesitated, aware that something was shifting between them. I have an early class tomorrow. Another time then. Blake nodded, not pushing. As they left the studio together, Riley found herself wondering what it would be like to spend time with Blake outside of their lessons, to know the man behind the millionaire facade that was gradually falling away with each dance they shared. The day before the competition, Blake insisted on a final dinner meeting to calm their pre-performance nerves. He made reservations at Stella's, an upscale but intimate restaurant with a secluded corner table that offered privacy from curious eyes. Riley arrived in a simple black dress that made Blake forget what he was saying mid-sentence when she approached the table. Her auburn hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders, so different from the practical ponytail she wore for their practice sessions. You look. Not ready for a dance rehearsal, Blake said, standing to greet her. Riley smiled. Neither do you. Blake was dressed in a navy suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and the blue of his eyes. Without the intensity of their dance sessions, he seemed more approachable, though no less imposing. Wine, he offered after they were seated. "Just one glass. I need a clear head for tomorrow." They ordered, and an easy conversation flowed about the competition, about music, about their lives before they met. Blake found himself sharing stories about his mother that he hadn't told anyone since her passing. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Riley said softly. She was. She would have liked you." Blake swirled the wine in his glass. "She always said I needed more art in my life, less business." Riley studied him. "Why did you really come to my studio that day? There are more prestigious dance instructors in the city." Blake considered the question. "Your website had a video of you teaching a group of kids. You looked joyful. Not pretentious or overly polished like some of the other instructors I researched." "So you chose me because I looked approachable?" "I chose you because you looked authentic," he corrected, "and I was right." Their eyes met across the table, and Riley felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with pre-competition nerves. "Tell me about your studio," Blake said. "How did you start it?" Riley's passion was evident as she described founding Elevate 3 years ago. "It was terrifying, leaving a secure position with an established company to start my own place. But I wanted to create a space where dance was accessible to everyone, not just those who could afford expensive private lessons. Hence the scholarship program I saw on your website," Riley nodded. "We provide free lessons to 20 underprivileged kids each year. I'd like to expand it, but..." She trailed off. "But finances are tight," Blake finished for her. "Running a small business isn't exactly the path to millions," she said with a light laugh. Blake studied her thoughtfully, but didn't offer platitudes or suggestions. Instead, he asked about her students, her teaching philosophy, her own journey with dance. By the time dessert arrived, a rich chocolate torte they shared between them, Riley realized hours had passed. It felt nothing like a business dinner and everything like a date. "I should get home," she said reluctantly. "Early start tomorrow. I'll drive you," Blake offered. "It's out of your way. I insist." His tone was gentle but firm. In his car, an understated luxury sedan rather than the flashy sports car Riley had half expected, they sat in comfortable silence for much of the ride. When they arrived at her apartment building, Blake walked her to the door. "Thank you for dinner," Riley said, suddenly feeling shy. "Thank you for the past 6 weeks." Blake's voice was low. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm grateful for the time we've spent together." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Blake leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Riley closed the distance. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as Blake's arms encircled her waist. Riley's hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heart beating rapidly beneath her fingers. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing unevenly. "This complicates things," Riley whispered. "I'm good with complicated," Blake replied, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Riley stepped back, needing space to think clearly. "We should focus on tomorrow. The competition is important," Blake finished. "But so is this." He gestured between them. "We'll talk after the competition," Riley promised. "Good night, Blake." He caught her hand before she could turn away. "For luck," he said, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. As Riley watched him drive away, she knew that whatever happened at tomorrow's competition, something more significant had already begun. The ballroom of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel was transformed for the annual spring charity ball. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over elegantly dressed guests, while tables adorned with spring flowers framed a gleaming dance floor. Backstage, Blake adjusted his bow tie for the 3rd time. His custom-tailored tuxedo fit perfectly, but he felt oddly constricted. Nervous. Riley appeared beside him, a vision in a flowing emerald gown that caught the light when she moved. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo, accentuating the graceful line of her neck. "Not about the dancing," Blake admitted, his eyes meeting hers. Riley understood his meaning. Last night's kiss had shifted something fundamental between them, creating a new tension they hadn't had time to address. "We're 3rd in the lineup," she said, maintaining professional focus. "Remember to breathe through the opening sequence and trust your muscle memory." Blake nodded, taking her hand briefly. "I trust you," he said simply. The first two couples performed admirably, a local news anchor and his wife, followed by a city councilwoman and her husband. Then the announcer's voice echoed through the ballroom. Next, performing a waltz to T. Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers, please welcome Blake Valentino and Riley Evans. They took their positions in the center of the floor. The audience faded away as the music began, and Blake found Riley's eyes. In that moment, he wasn't dancing for the judges or the audience or even for his mother's memory. He was dancing for Riley. With Riley, their performance flowed like water. Each turn, each step felt organic and alive. When Blake lifted Riley, it felt effortless, as though they'd been partners for years rather than weeks. The connection between them was palpable, transcending technique to become something true and genuine. As the music reached its crescendo, they executed the series of turns they'd practiced countless times, culminating in the dramatic final dip. Blake held Riley securely, their faces inches apart, both breathing hard but smiling. The applause was thunderous as Blake brought Riley upright. They bowed to the audience, hands clasped tightly together. That was. Riley began as they exited the floor. Magic, Blake finished, his eyes never leaving hers. They watched the remaining performances from the sidelines, standing closer than necessary, shoulders touching. When the judges retired to deliberate, Blake led Riley to a quiet corner of the ballroom. "Whatever the results, that was perfect," he said. "You were perfect." Riley shook her head. "We were perfect together." Blake's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "About last night, ladies and gentlemen, the judges have reached their decision." Their conversation was cut short as they returned to join the other competitors. Blake kept hold of Riley's hand, unwilling to break the connection. In third place, Councilwoman Davis and Mr. Davis. Polite applause filled the room as the couple accepted their bronze trophy. In second place, Blake Valentino and Riley Evans. There was a moment of surprise. Blake had been so focused on Riley that winning had become secondary before they stepped forward to accept the silver trophy. Blake's hand rested lightly on Riley's back as they smiled for photographs. Later, as the competition portion concluded and the ball began in earnest, Blake led Riley onto the now crowded dance floor. Other couples swirled around them, but they moved in their own world. "Are you disappointed we didn't win?" Riley asked, following his lead in an impromptu waltz. "Not even slightly," Blake replied honestly. "I got something much more valuable than a trophy." Riley raised an eyebrow, waiting. "I remembered joy," he said simply, "and I found you." "Blake," Riley began, then hesitated. "What happens now? The competition is over. Our contract is technically fulfilled." Blake guided them to the edge of the dance floor and through French doors that opened onto a moonlit terrace. The spring air was cool but not cold, stars visible above the city lights. "I want to continue dancing with you," Blake said, turning to face her, "and not just waltz or foxtrot." "What kind of dance did you have in mind?" Riley asked, a small smile playing at her lips, the kind that lasts. Blake took both her hands in his. "Riley, these past 6 weeks have been the most alive I've felt since my mother died, maybe longer. Being with you, dancing with you, it's awakened something I didn't know was sleeping." Riley's eyes softened. "I've felt it too, but Blake, our worlds are so different." "You're a man who's falling in love with his dance instructor," he interrupted gently. "The rest is just details." "Love," Riley's voice was barely audible. "Too soon to say that word?" Blake asked, vulnerability showing through his usual confidence. Riley shook her head slowly. "No. Not too soon." She reached up to touch his face. "Just unexpected." Blake turned his head to kiss her palm. "I'd like to see where this goes. No contracts, no lessons, just us discovering if what we feel is as real as it seems." "And what about your busy CEO schedule?" "Your board meetings and business trips. I'll make time for what matters," Blake said firmly, "starting tonight." Their lips met beneath the stars, the music from the ballroom providing a distant soundtrack. This kiss was unhurried, a promise rather than a question. When they finally parted, Riley's eyes were bright with emotion. "I should warn you, I don't date casually." "Good," Blake replied. "Neither do I, not anymore." They stayed on the terrace, talking and occasionally dancing until the ball began winding down. Blake introduced Riley to Richard Thompson and other longtime supporters of his mother's charity, proudly keeping her by his side. "Your mother would be very proud," Richard told Blake quietly as the evening concluded. "Not just of the dancing, but of seeing you happy again." Blake's arm tightened around Riley's waist. "Thank you, Richard. I think she would be too." 6 months later, Elevate Dance Studio celebrated its expansion into a newly renovated building. The space was 3 times larger than the original studio, with multiple practice rooms, state-of-the-art sound systems, and a small performance theater. The scholarship program had grown from 20 students to 50, with a waiting list for the next year. Blake had provided the investment capital, but Riley maintained majority ownership and complete creative control. Their partnership extended beyond the personal to the professional, each respecting the other's expertise. On the night of the grand opening, after the speeches and the champagne toast and the performances by Riley's students, Blake and Riley found themselves alone in the main studio. The floors gleamed under the soft lighting, the mirrors reflecting their solitary figures. "Dance with me." Blake held out his hand. Riley stepped into his embrace without hesitation. They moved together without music at first, finding their rhythm in the sound of their breathing and their footsteps on the polished floor. "Remember our first lesson?" Riley asked. "You were so stiff." "I was terrified," Blake admitted with a laugh. "Not of the dancing, but of not measuring up to your standards. And now I know that even when I mess up, you'll follow my lead." Blake executed a perfect turn, bringing Riley closer. "That's what partnership means," Riley smiled up at him. "Speaking of partnership, I've been thinking about that," Blake said, slowing their dance to a gentle sway. "About making our partnership more official." Riley's heart quickened. "Blake," he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I had a whole speech planned," he said, suddenly looking nervous. "About how you've changed my life, how dancing with you that first day led to falling in love with you, how I can't imagine my future without you in it." "That sounds like a pretty good speech to me," Riley said, her voice thick with emotion. Blake opened the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring. "Riley Evans, will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." As Blake slipped the ring onto her finger, Riley pulled him into a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't express. When they parted, Blake pressed his forehead to hers. "I never thought looking for a dance partner would lead me to the love of my life," he murmured. Riley smiled, remembering how far they'd come from that first lesson. "The best dances are the ones we don't see coming." Blake spun her in a playful turn, "and we've only just begun." As they danced in the empty studio, bathed in soft light and wrapped in each other's arms, both knew they had found something rare and precious, a partnership of equals, a love that moved with grace, and a future bright with possibility. In the year that followed, they married in an intimate ceremony in the garden where Blake's mother had once tended roses. They continued to compete in the annual spring charity ball, eventually winning first place with a foxtrot that brought the audience to their feet. But their greatest achievement wasn't measured in trophies or business success. It was in the life they built together, day by day, step by step, a life filled with purpose, passion, and the perfect rhythm of two hearts dancing as one.